morning and welcome to the 22nd conversation on urbanization and urban issues, which is jointly hosted by the India Habitat Center and ICRIER. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Junaid Ahmad with us here. He is known to most Delhiwalas, not only because he is the country director for India today, but that he's done several stints in several avatars. So we are really very familiar with his work. Dr. Ahmad is a Bangladeshi national, and before coming to Delhi as country director, he was the chief of staff in the office of the president of the World Bank. Before that, he was heading the global water practice from the bank, and he's worked in the areas of urban finance and city management. So you can see all that comes together to become an ideal person to whom we can shoot all our questions. I had said to Dr. Ahmad that in this particular format that we have, we bring experts, but we ask them to speak in ordinary English to answer questions of non-experts. And knowing Junaid for many, many years, I can tell you he is extremely, extremely down to earth in explaining very complex issues. Before I hand over to him to just initiate the subject, initiate his thoughts on water, rethinking service delivery in India, I would only like to once again admit in public that Dr. Junaid Ahmad is responsible for my getting interested in urban issues in India. He used to be working in Delhi in 2008 when the government had asked me to chair a committee on urban infrastructure and service delivery. And but for his passion for the subject and his support in guiding me on how to go about it, I would never have taken up this assignment. And it's now been 10 years and I'm beginning to share his passion. So I'm really delighted to bring him in person to this audience. Put all your tough and complex questions. Here is one man who can answer them. Thank you, and Junaid.
Thank you. One of the things I've learned in the many years is never to say no to Isha. If you say no to Isha, you only do so at your own peril. It has always been a pleasure to work for Isha and to be guided by her. Leadership is not built, leadership is inherited from above, and up there, when they decided that Isha was to play her role, leadership was certainly one of the gifts. So it has been a pleasure to work with Isha, from whom I have learned so much about India and its challenges. You know, when I speak about water, I have to tell you, it's as a Bangladeshi, water is very much in our soul. And one of the things that I learned a long time ago, that without managing water, Bangladesh will not go where it is supposed to go. And I've learned a lot about water from my wife Samia, who's a singer, and the music of water in Bangladesh is, as you know, even more dramatic than the reality of water. But you know, when I think of water, I remember growing up in Bangladesh, and one of the distinct memories is when the call of the azan in the morning would happen. I would remember my father getting up and shouting at someone downstairs to turn the pump on. So basically, water arrives in the morning, you turn the pump on, and it fills the overhead tank. So that was always in my mind. I never questioned it. It was not an issue. Growing up, it was constantly put the pump on in the morning so you could fill up the overhead tank, and we could get water for the rest of the day, because water in Dhaka city was intermittent. It would arrive for 4, 5, 6 hours, and then the pressure would fall. So you better store the water in the overhead tank and mimic 24/7. And then as I grew up, I went abroad to study, and I would come home during summer, and sure enough, at the call of Azan, my father would get up. But this time, he wouldn't call anyone. He'd pick up his little remote, and he would press, and the pump would go on. So technology had improved. We could turn on the pump from our bedroom, but it was still the intermittent supply of water, right? And it became so ingrained that I never questioned it. And I didn't question it until year 2001, when for the first time I came to work in India with the water and sanitation program. And I'd just come from South Africa, where my family and I were based. And there, it was never an issue of 24/7 water. Water was always available 24/7. And the city manager of Johannesburg came to India, and as we were driving from the airport, he asked me, "What are these tanks on top of houses?" And so I explained it to him, and he looked at me. He says, "Let me understand this. New Delhi, the capital of India, does not give 24/7 water?" And my answer was, yes, it doesn't, right? Even then, as working on water, the bias of all these years of growing up and watching water tanks get filled was so ingrained in me that I was not ready to question it. It took Ketso Gordon coming here saying, "Why is this?" Right? And that's when I really started focusing on, why does India not have 24/7 water? Why is it that you cannot go to the water tap, turn it on at any moment, and expect water to be there without any tanks being filled on your roof, right? Or the groundwater being pumped up. And so a whole world opened up in which I began to ask the question, why is it that only 4 to 5 hours of water a day in Delhi? Why is it only 1 hour of water a day in Bangalore? It was at that time, and I don't know how more it has improved. And then over time I discovered that people began to tell me, "Oh, but we used to have 24/7 water in New Delhi. We used to have 24/7 water in Kolkata. We used to have 24/7 water in Mumbai." And that was a puzzle, that over time, actually India saw a decline in its ability to deliver 24/7. So obviously the first question I asked is, it must be a question of water scarcity. And I remember the team, actually many of whom are here, we did a little graph. And in the graph, on one side, we had number of hours of water being delivered into the city, or not the amount of water being delivered into the city, and number of hours that the city delivered water to its citizens. So different cities, how much water did they get, and how many hours did they deliver? Well, guess what? There was no relationship between the amount of water available in the city and the number of hours that the city delivered the water. Completely no correlation, right? In fact, Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata were getting water per capita per day more than London, more than Paris, more than some African cities. But each of those cities, London, Paris, and several of the African cities, were actually delivering 24/7, whereas Delhi was only delivering a few hours of water. So further exploration, why was this happening? Well, the short answer was, it wasn't water scarcity, it wasn't technology, It certainly wasn't capacity, right? I challenge anyone in the world to say that Indian engineers don't understand water. Right? Challenge anyone in the world to say that Indian universities don't produce terrific engineers. It's not capacity, it's not skills, it's not technology. What is it? Well, it was interesting for me to discover, again, it was literally a discovery that the chief minister of several states are the policymaker for water, are the regulator for water, are also in fact the chairman of the water board. So judge and jury are one and the same. So if judge and jury are one and the same, how do you ensure accountability of your water provider? Right? In addition, if judge and jury are the same, and I'm a constituency member of a chief minister, I can go to him or her and say, ma'am, sir, I want a job in this water agency. The chief minister can't say it's not my responsibility. I cannot give you a job. But when you're chairperson of that agency, you sure can give a job. So the conflict begins to emerge. Then what is interesting is, how are these agencies funded? They're mostly funded from budgets. Right? They're not funded from tariffs. They're not funded from citizens' income. They're funded from budgetary support. The moment it comes from budgetary support, you have to ask yourself, who does the chief engineer of a water agency respond to? The citizen, the client, or to the chief secretary, or to the chief minister? The answer is very simple. You respond to who gives you the budget. Right? So the citizens' accountability to citizens is zero. Right? So judge and jury, mixed. Accountability to citizens, zero. I said, what else could matter? So I asked a particular chief engineer of a city water agency, it's really expensive to maintain intermittent. Why is it expensive? When you have full pressure in water pipes, nothing can enter the pipes. These pipes have little cracks, but when you have full pressure, it acts as a barrier. The moment the pressure falls, anything outside can seep in. And anything outside does seep in when pressure falls, and next morning when the pressure is high, it takes all that it collected straight to your water tank. So the health implications of intermittent supply is huge. So it's just the beginning of the cost of intermittent. So I asked the chief engineer, I said, why is it that this low equilibrium of intermittent supply remains? Unaccounted for water, 50% on average in cities in India, right? Whereas in some African cities it's 20%. Why this misuse of water? So this chief engineer smiled. He was an elderly gentleman. He smiled and I could see that he realized he had to teach me a few things. So he said to me, what do you think a intermittent water story does? Well, it turned out, he explained to me, that when water is full pressure, you have full pressure water. When water pressure falls, it falls. Next morning, water pressure goes up again, it's full pressure. Next evening it falls, it falls. He says, what does it act like? So it acts like a water hammer, right? Pressure up, pressure down, pressure up, pressure down, as opposed to a constant pressure. I said, yes. He says, when pressure goes up and down, what happens? I said, I don't know. He says, pipes break. I said, okay. He says, then I can give out more contracts. I mean, he had now completely turned the story from resource capacity, technical capacity, technology, to real politics of why intermittent supply remains. Then he said, by the way, in that city, who do you think has influence over the water trucks that come in when your neighborhood doesn't have water? Right? It's the very politicians who influence the water jug board. So why would they have any incentive to give you 24/7 water? This is completely new dimension of what I was hearing. In fact, I remember once going to Ahmedabad, and in one of the slums, I asked this elderly lady who lives in the slums, who gets water by going a certain distance and getting water from there, and every other day from a water tanker where she pays. I said, wouldn't you like to be connected to the Ahmedabad water supply? And she looked at me and she says, for what? Right? I said, what do you mean for what? She says, they have nothing to give me. Meaning she was telling me, I'm not interested in intermittent water supply. I would rather pay and get my water, and I know where my water is coming from. Another lesson. The final lesson was very clear. You compare two countries, Israel and India. And I take Israel because recently the Prime Minister of Israel was here, and he brought a whole delegation of people, and in that delegation about 35 to 40% were water specialists. Right? So Israel, when I went and visited Israel, I learned that Israel considers water a public good, and therefore it prices water to its maximum. India considers water a public good, and therefore it chooses not to price it. Fundamentally, two different definitions of public good and what should be priced. Israel is clear. This is scarce resource. It's scarce not only in terms of availability, but in terms of our security needs. If we don't have water, we're in trouble. Therefore, we want to put a value to water. It must reflect the importance society has about water. And so they price it. And in pricing it, they make it efficient, right? In pricing it, they ensure universal access to services. Now that's ironic. I always claim that the most expensive water for poor people is free water. The moment you start giving out free water, the utility or the agency that gives water does not have the incentive to engage with the clients, does not have an incentive to be efficient in water management, because the budget will always give them the money. Israel, amongst one of many countries, turns it around and says, if you price water, you'll make sure that the poor actually get it. It's easy to give a voucher as a subsidy, that's not a problem. But very hard to actually ensure poor people get water if it is priced at zero. Middle class captures it. We captured it. Right. Another lesson. So when we in the World Bank asked the question, how can we help a city in India turn around its water supply, and we bring all sorts of technocratic solutions, ultimately the question is, how do you engage on these political issues? Now, it is, what lessons have we learned from around the world? From around the world, we've learned that the issue is not public or private operator of water. The issue is whether the water is an accountable agency. It can be public or it can be private. One of the world's largest water utilities and most efficient is Sao Paulo, Sabesp in Brazil. It's a public organization. It raises most of its money from the US capital markets, and it's able to offer universal access to water. At the time when Sao Paulo completely went dry, it was able to negotiate access to water, right? Because it is an entity which is held accountable for the delivery of water. And in being accountable, it runs both capital investment as well as operating and maintaining the utility. Our South Asia has an interesting split personality. We have one part of government that invests, and then another part of government asks to maintain. I build, you maintain. It is the worst incentive you can create to get someone to maintain something. When you're asked to build and maintain, you'll make sure what you build is actually affordable and what you build is something that can be maintained. But if someone else builds, they will build it to the gold standard because they don't have to maintain it. And our part of the world, the O&M policy is build, decay, rebuild. Right? And the cost of that is huge. And in a world of climate change, when water availability is becoming erratic naturally, if we're not able to manage water better, it's going to get worse and worse. And so this whole issue of how do we achieve 24/7 water in urban India, we've talked about the rural, I'll stay on the urban. Urban India requires a complete rethink of who manages urban water in India. Now, is it going to be the 74th Amendment implemented, where the mayor is responsible for delivering water, where citizens can hold the utility or the agency accountable, and what will it take to create that kind of an entity? So it actually requires state government handing over the utility to a city government and holding the city government accountable, city government creating a separation between the mayor and the entity that delivers the water, that there is a board that makes the water a professional provider, and let the state then be a regulator because it's not the service provider. Right? Let the city be a policy maker, and let the agency be the service provider. This separation of power in India's federalism is, in my opinion, the political economy window in which India may well achieve effective, efficient water utilities that will be able to give 24/7 water. And the stakes are high. India has just entered its urbanization process. Its future growth path lies in making its urban system truly efficient. And one of the underpinnings of that is good public service delivery. And water has to be part of it. But to solve that, one has to acknowledge that it is a political issue, not a technical issue. Once the political issue in which we recognize that we have to keep at arm's length these service providers and create that framework, all the technical stuff can come in. And until that comes, that political recognition, India will have to continue to have its overhead tanks, dip into its groundwater, have intermittent supply, and that's very costly for an economy seeking 8% plus growth rate and an aspiration to move its citizens into middle class. So that is, as simply as I could, I hope not in too much technical language, my story of how I discovered intermittent supply and water utilities in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Junaid. I think you can sit because what we're going to do is collect half a dozen questions and then ask you to reply and then go through that process a number of times. So may I request people to raise their hand, those who want to comment or question, introduce yourself and then a brief remark.
Hello everyone, my name is Sanjay Gupta and I have a questions regarding the business of RO systems and water purifier. Even if the water agencies are delivering water to everybody's house, the same water is being treated by using the equipments of various kinds. So it is once again making it complex when somebody is using that free or paid water from a particular agency. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Navarun Bhattacharjee. So, I have been in this sector for quite a long time. What's interesting to me is the discourse hasn't changed in the last 25 years. So we still say governance is the key issue in case of water service delivery. Now, what do you think did not happen in India in 25 years to change this? I mean, there has been enough push to look 74th Amendment, the whole processes of governance. And of course, to my mind, one other important aspect is the issue of municipal finance or for urban infrastructure finance, which probably is one of the key poles. So, thank you.
My name is Tilak Arora, and my question is in two parts. To ensure 24/7 water, it could be in two parts in the sense that inland areas of the country, India, and the coastal areas. Inland areas, I remember that we used to have water supply 24/7. We used to have ground wells in small villages also. With a rope you could get the water and there was no shortage. But now that in a city like Delhi, with groundwater going deeper and deeper, requiring drilling, what's the future? Of course, the wastage of water is there, which has to be plugged in. And now I come to the coastal areas. There used to be thinking that with coastal areas around the ocean, you can get a lot of water through desalination, which requires huge investments. But now with the Israeli G, which can give you desalination in 3.5 hours, how do you think? And with your experience of South Africa, I would think of the present water crisis in Cape Town and how to solve the problem at Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Camilla Christensen Rai. I work at the Danish Embassy. I work on urban development and the water sector. And I have one question. In which way do you see that the Smart City program of the government of India contributes to the water sector and rethinking service delivery in India? Thank you.
My name is Junaid. I had the privilege of being associated with a water utility almost 2 decades ago. And the observation that came from my right that nothing has changed is absolutely correct. The water sector, two things. One is that when we talk of rethinking service delivery, it's not just water, it's also wastewater, because it's a complete cycle. And that is something that unless we ingrain into people's minds, we don't recycle wastewater, we don't reuse wastewater, we don't use the Israeli technology of drip irrigation to save water even for watering our plants or gardens or lawns. That is one. The other is that the water sector used to 25 years ago and today remind me of the old Indian railway system where you had a first class, a second class and a third class. The first class takes water for granted, gets 450 LPCD NDMC in Delhi. The second class gets 220 to maybe 130, 140. And the third class is the people who are not yet connected through pipe supply. And there is a complete parallel water economy that used to work then, perhaps works now also, where the utility has let go and there are private small-scale water suppliers who have taken over, and the people are willing to pay. The willingness to pay is not there. The water system here, if we calculate perhaps, if we give 2 hours of supply every day, if all households run water for 2 hours, they don't in any case. So it's just the mindset that we have to collect water. That is something that we have to preserve because that is the psyche that we have. That is something that we need to get into. So these are 2 things that I would request your comments on. And then perhaps permit me to add further because I have a million questions after.
So there's a million questions. I'm glad that the water team is here from the World Bank. I'd be glad if they join in answering those million questions. Sanjay, you know the issue you mentioned about water purifier. That's one example of the cost that households have to bear because the water that's coming into your house is not only intermittent, you don't trust its quality. And of course, overhead tanks, electric pumps, these are additional costs. That's precisely why we say that intermittent supply is more costly than full force supply. The challenge will be if a water agency begins to give full force supplies, convincing you to let go of your water purifier, let go of your water tank, and because you don't trust the system from delivering. In some cities around the world that have moved from intermittent to full service, they actually have bought back the additional equipment that households have had. So it's taken both an incentive as well as a shift in culture and convincing people that this is happening. We were part of a very important program in Karnataka in 3 towns, Hubli, Dharwad, Belgaum, in which basically Karnataka government put aside neighborhoods in each of the town and created a water agency, brought in a private company to manage that water, and over a 2-year period, if I'm not wrong, achieved 24/7 delivery. And a lot had to do with using civil society to engage communities, to convince them that a shift towards 24/7 would be possible if they were willing to pay, etc. What was interesting is that it was never willingness to pay that was an issue, it was willingness to charge. Once you're able to convince people that you will be true to your word, and even if you gradually increase services and increase tariff, people respond. So there are possibilities of engaging in the 24/7 story through neighborhood approaches, and I understand that that's beginning to expand, that even Delhi is beginning to do that. Last time we tried to do it in Delhi, Mr. Kejriwal had us thrown out of Delhi, but it's nice to know that his Delhi is now redoing exactly what we had suggested a decade ago. I guess everyone can learn. So this issue around that you asked, what things haven't changed and what needs to change and what didn't change. I think that for me, if water and municipal decentralization can be brought together, that will create the type of force that may unleash the change that we want. But the ability, or I think the political context of that happening, 10 years ago or more, I used to think the 74th Amendment could be launched by itself. I've sort of shifted that to a belief that unless India's federalism moves towards a competitive federalism, you will not get the pressure on some states who would choose to go to the 3rd tier to do delivery of services. So I would say that if indeed India's move towards a real federalism or strengthening of its federalism is happening, we may see the political economy break, not across all states, but in sufficient number of states that you can begin to benchmark one state against the other. It's that competitive federalism that I think is going to be a big force in India. And so let's see if that happens. But I think unless mayors and the water providers are on one platform, you'll not get that separation from judge from jury, in my opinion. Yeah.
If I may ask, I think this is the right time to ask, what lesson can we learn from Dhaka in answer to this question?
Right, okay. Dhaka is interesting. Dhaka, basically, it's a public sector reform program. So you have Dhaka Water Agency that has actually moved towards almost 24/7, brought down its unaccounted for water, and it's beginning to provide water into slum areas, and it's beginning to take a metropolitan-wide approach. Now, why did this happen? I think it happened for several reasons. One is that the government of Bangladesh, central government, because they run Dhaka, decided to actually professionalize the water utility, so that the CEO of the water utility is hired from the private sector. There's a board that is in between the government and the city and the water utility. So there's a real difference in terms of governance. Third is it's able to increase its water prices, but its water prices are linked to service delivery. And in many ways, I think the real reason this has happened is because in effect, our Prime Minister acts like the mayor of Dhaka, right? So her response was, I want this constituency to support me, and I'm going to give 24/7. So ironically, the Prime Minister is the mayor, but it's a public sector reform program in which autonomy of service delivery, both capital investment as well as O&M, is in the hands of the water utility.
So a chief minister in India could do that, selecting a city.
Absolutely, absolutely, without any doubt. And my link to the federalism story is what will put the pressure on a chief minister is that competitive pressure. No issue. A chief minister in Hyderabad water was completely a function of what the chief minister will do. The Smart Cities program, I think the Smart Cities program is an attempt to I think try and create a setup where technology and institutions will lead to better service delivery. I think it's been defined more as technology than institution. I think we have to bring it back to the story of the institution. What you now have is municipality on one side, a development authority on the other side, and now the introduction of an SPV. The three may or may not be linked. And I think the institutional challenge that Government of India's Amrut program has is to bring consistency between the management of these three entities. Perhaps the municipal commissioner will get empowered to actually be the glue between the three. Somehow this fragmented institutions have to be brought together to create the right pressure of a smart cities program to affect water utility. Inland versus coastal, the way you raised the question is exactly right. Groundwater is falling, wastage is happening. These are all linked to improved service delivery. So it fits into the story of what I'm trying to say. On the coastal side, you're right, desalinization, which a decade ago was very expensive, prices have come down hugely. Cape Town only uses surface water, and now they've realized that they actually should have diversified their water source. So they're now looking at groundwater, desalinization, and wastewater recycling. All of that is possible because prices are beginning to reflect the scarcity. In India, prices don't reflect the scarcity, so no one has an incentive to use these other mechanisms. First class, second class, third class, I actually like that. And the interesting story is all classes are getting more water than they need, and in fact you can deliver 24/7 without reaching that type of per liter. And it's a question of governance changes, pricing changes, and a real engagement between government and society about changing the culture of use of water. There has to be a whole campaign behind this. At the level of a Swachh Bharat to bring citizens to understand. And that's what happened in the three towns in Karnataka. There was a real effort for a year to change the mindset before the reforms have started. The puzzle in Karnataka is, having succeeded, why hasn't it scaled up? Right? That to me is still a puzzle, but I hear that it's beginning to change. Maybe my colleagues who work on Karnataka can say it. But demonstration seems not to be enough.
Excellency, I have three different issues, mainly coming up arising out of your own speech. First, I have been to Bangladesh and made some effort to change the cultivation practices. From sugar cane to sugar beet, which reduces the water by 1/3. Okay, we have started that program, and Prime Minister and the Agriculture Minister have approved the project. That is one. Second thing, you mentioned about Belgaum, Karnataka, and I belong to Belgaum, and one of the professors in engineering college in Kodapur area has developed a water harvester on top of his bungalow. And I tell you, the 4 or 5 members of the family, they have rainwater harvesting system which lasts for the entire year. Now, it's a simple thing, anybody can do it, provided government makes sure that building contractor provides this facility in the building before building gets approved. So that is a little complicated issue. Third, sir, agriculture, if you agree with me, consumes largest amount of water. And to that end, with the help of NASA, we have brought out a small chip which you use like in your mobile phone. This is that small chip, fix it to the leaf, it sends you signals, I am thirsty, give me water, only then you irrigate. You can reduce the water consumption in irrigation water by 70 to 90%. This is just a measuring device, you attach it to this, it's on your laptop and on your computers, you can get entire message right around the clock for each. It covers 50 acres. This was mentioned to me by me in one of the meetings that was held by Dr. Chidambaram, Science Advisor to the Government of India. None of the IITs have this. I told him, he mentioned it, but it stops there. Now, who is to bear the cat?
My name is Pratap Chandani, IHC member. I am associated with the IIT Delhi Water Resource Team and also IIT Bombay on the wastewater side. So an observation, like our city of Noida, for example, we have a beautiful canal, Ganga Canal, going through our district in the NCR, Gulmohar and Ghaziabad, which carries 60,000 cusecs of Ganga water coming from Ahluwalia. It was made during the British time. And we looked at the water reports. If you just filter it, it's better or as good as the water you have on your table, the mountain water, which is sold at a premium. So what they're trying in Noida, we'll see how it turns out, is bring a fraction of this water for the city. So you stop extracting from the ground. So expect the water table to actually spring up. And we did reconnaissance of this canal for the last 1 year on cycles, in a carbon neutral way. We found that small percentage, maybe 3, 4, 5% can actually serve the need of entire NCR. In fact, at RO question, because of the water quality is that, I have the report and I brought 3, 4 papers for you. It can serve, it can do away with this. It just needs filter, a little bit of UV, and good to go. And that's the nature's RO versus your man-made, whatever you can do. So it'll be interesting to see how it happens in water. And I hope the differences can be sorted out, and now the government and center and UP being same, maybe this can start to serve daily needs also.
Good evening, sir. My name is Rahul Bansal. Sir, more than 80% of...
Can we see you? Maybe to stand up and see you. Thank you.
More than 80% of the water utilization is in the agriculture sector. So in rural areas, we have a paradox. One side, the highest utilization of the water is agriculture, and other side we have the access problem. And once we have the access to the irrigation, then we have a drinking facility problem in the rural areas. And once we have that, then we have the problems for the sanitation. So these are not linked together. I mean, what are the challenges that the agriculture sector is facing, and the rural household is neglected in that place? So your views on that?
Hi, I am Arshad. So my question is, in today's economic survey, it was reported that climate change will have an impact on agriculture from 20 to 25% in the midterm. So how can we ensure adequate water in terms of climate change?
Let me answer the climate change one. Precisely because of climate change, even more important that the institutions of service delivery in water gets addressed. We are no longer in a world of abundance, we're in a world of very erratic supply. And in a world of erratic supply, you have to make sure that the service provider is even more efficient. But it also does mean that agriculture, which uses far too many people, far too much land, and far too much water, has to become far more efficient and let go of water in particular. And climate change has taught us that you have to begin to invest invest in climate resilient agriculture. And climate resilient agriculture has both a change in cropping as well as change in where you produce the crops. India has to very seriously look at its agricultural policies, its procurement pricing system, and how it actually gives ownership to water, groundwater, for agriculture to actually become far more efficient and release water. That gets an added pressure in climate change. It may seem ironic that it is ironic that 80% of water is in agriculture. I think it's 90%, and you have issues of sanitation, you have issues of service delivery. Institutions of water delivery in rural areas differ. Some places they're very dense. So you take Kerala, for example, very dense villages, and you can actually get panchayat managed water supply systems. And we have a lot of successes that are emerging from Kerala. The other places where you are in very scarce population and villages are very dispersed, you're into groundwater. That requires groundwater management, groundwater ownership in terms of water management. Both are independent of the story of sanitation, but linked to the story of sanitation. In India, the story of sanitation, as is well known, is both is an issue of behavior change, but it's also an issue of technology, and finally, it's an issue of linkage to water. But all of these are not rocket science. These can be managed, and I think to be managed, you have to bring in far greater use of community-based systems in managing water. When communities own the water source, they are far better at dealing with the commons problem than if it's, if you will, the big rural water agencies. The example of Noida and the technology on irrigation tells you that the technology is never the problem. And it's linking technology to the institution, into institutions that really matter. I want to introduce you to Michael Haney, who's sitting right behind you. Michael is our sector manager in the World Bank in charge of water in South Asia and water in India. He knows far more than most of us in the World Bank about water, having lived here many years, worked across water, energy, and many other sectors. So he's leading a team that's beginning to look at these relationships between technology, institutions, and learning across states. I'm hoping that maybe we can finally say that things are changing in India, and that this team under Michael will be able to bring a new set of support to various cities and panchayats as we go forward, so that 5 years from now, Navarum and I will be celebrating, not questioning what happened. Why is it a repeat of the last decade?
My name is Ahmad. I am an urban planner. I work with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. My question is regarding the kind of model maybe which is useful to supply water to several cities of India. One of the solutions we suggested is the Chief Minister taking the leadership of one or the other prominent cities in various states. But would that be actually a replicable model? Because not all cities might have some stalwart leaders who might be able to support. And when we look at the number of cities we have in India, is such a model replicable? One of the solutions which I perhaps in electricity we did something amazing in Gujarat. I've gone to Gujarat, and we had a loss-making corporation called GEB, Gujarat Electricity Board. There was the unbundling of service where the manufacturer of electricity, the producer, was separate, and the DISCOMs, they were given separate responsibility. Then the actual place where the loss was happening, whether in the manufacturing or in the transmission and distribution, that could be pinpointed. In the present day, we have several companies, 5 companies operating across Gujarat who are supplying electricity, and it is more or less in profit nowadays. Can we replicate such a model of supply for water, where you have the procurer and the purifier of water, which is one company, a private company? You have the DISCOMs like separate companies who are supplying water to certain wards within the city, or maybe if it is a small city, a single company which is supplying.
where you will pinpoint and identify there is a problem in the procurement, in the verification, or in the supply, where are the losses in terms of economy, in terms of the material. Such a model is applicable across India.
So I think it's important to allow the diversity of India to create diverse solutions. Goa will have a very different approach to water delivery than Maharashtra or Bihar. But once you allow that diversity to come out, you'll find that the different models that you have mentioned can emerge. Right? So if you take Australia, which is to me one of the most fascinating stories of water reform, and one that I believe India can truly gain some interesting insights. In Australia, the Competitions Commission created a incentive framework in which it asks the states to actually improve its service provision in infrastructure, including water. And what it did was it laid out certain basic outcomes that your system of institutions had to have a service provider, regulator, and policymaker separate, that you had to have a financially viable model, so subsidy included, but it had to be viable, environmentally sustainable. There were some simple but very powerful outcomes, and it let states decide which way it wanted to do. So some states went for a pure public agency, but separated the producer of water from the distributor of water. Others brought in public-private partnership, but all of them followed these principles of outlined in the State Competitions Commission. And if you go to Australia today, you can go to states where they have huge benchmarking. So you know city X compared to city Y, how they're doing. And citizens are able to actually pick up the phone and say, how come that city over there is getting water, or that neighborhood is getting water at a better rate than we are? Or how come when water breaks down in neighborhoods, they're much faster in responding? So different parts of India will evolve different models depending on the nature of that state. But the idea is, will that kind of diversity be allowed to actually deliver? I think Isha is right. Today, if chief ministers decide, even if they took each chief minister to one city and moved it, it would create a huge benchmark and would make a very big difference. But you have to allow, as I said, you have to allow Goa to approach delivery. In Goa, what I would have thought would be one distributor, given its size. Obviously, Maharashtra will have several distributors depending on the town. Several small towns would come together with one common distribution. So there are different models that will emerge. But at the end of the day, you have to ask, is separation of powers respected? Is valuation of water respected? Is accountability to citizens respected? Is the publication of the data on how you're doing respected? Is there the right form of regulation? It can be a regulator, or it can be regulation by contract. I mean, there are different ways of doing it. Those simple elements would actually drive a reform process in a state. Today we're discussing with Shimla the potential of a Shimla water company being created. I don't know whether the politics will allow that to happen, but they're very far down the road in that discussion. If that happens, then you will have Shimla actually with one water utility, arm's length from the state, where investment and operations are under one company, where there is a storyline of how tariffs will be increased, but alongside service delivery, where you start from a certain number of hours of delivery to all the way, hopefully, to 24/7, where you have universal access. These can be written out in a contract between the state and the service provider, right? But you have to give the service provider that arm's length accountability.
I see a hand here, so one question. I'll come to you.
Part of my question has already been answered. My name is Ratna Mathur. I work with CARE India. We are a civil society organization working essentially to be kind of a link between government and communities. And So my question is, from that perspective, and I really liked what you just shared about there being possibly alternate models. Do they all have to be centered around large governments? Can we not, large government systems? Can there not be a more community-based, community-owned system, more entrepreneurial, probably, working with the kind of collectives that we are seeing across communities? The key issue is that, what is it that the bank or policymakers will promote? Being a development bank, the priorities of the World Bank or say Asian Development Bank would be very different from those of commercial interest. So the kind of models that you would promote would, specifically need to, look at issues like social inclusion and some of the key things that you have mentioned. So can we then not make a distinction between the kind of services which get created, how are they managed? Can we not make a distinction between the kind of consumers we are talking about? Because even when we are talking in urban areas, there are domestic consumers and there are other consumers. And a large proportion of the water supply in urban areas is used by non-domestic consumers. Secondly, I think it's also important to make a distinction between the water service requirements of large metro cities and the smaller towns. Those are also urban areas. And I think that is a distinction which is not probably made adequately because we are all so geared towards seeing large government, large projects. So how do we make that, how do we make sure that the accountability and that the alternate models are more community owned?
Good evening, my name is Mark. I'm a PhD student from Jawaharlal University. And my work is on urban water supply, and a lot of what actually you shared sort of syncs with my work. I think the sort of solutions and suggestions which you made, I think are a long shot. I think in terms of the change of hands from the political leadership to a more agency managerial sort of role. But I think considering India, where I think elections are won and lost on the basis of what has happened in this city, I would like to ask you more of some sort of maybe intermediary solutions to what steps can utilities take till the time that there is no political control on water. Because it seems to me that these are actually, be it the Delhi Jal Board, I mean you mentioned Hyderabad also, the Hyderabad Municipal Water Supply and Sewerage Board. These are revenue deficit organizations. If I'm correct, the Delhi Jal Board owns almost about like 2,000 to 3,000 crores to the Delhi government. In a way, if you think about it, it's a real lose-lose situation. Because the Delhi government is losing money, and also the Delhi Jal Board is a revenue deficit organization. So, what are the intermediary steps that a utility can take? In my mind, one solution which comes up is the idea to have maybe progressive tariffs, because I think our revenue structure is just too simple. We have domestic, commercial, block tariff system. But what if we break it down? What if, like, for example, somebody mentioned that NTMC area rates, let's say, like 450 LPCD. But what if, and the same person pays for the same person, the tariffs are the same for a person using that amount of water, and someone, let's say in Moderator. So what if we break up the tariff system, have more of a progressive tariffs for dependent on area, so that this utilities can actually earn more revenues, make up the deficits, invest in its infrastructure which is breaking down, and move towards a more 24/7 sort of system. Thank you.
Again, taking on from what some of my colleagues from here said about success stories. I think the Jal Nirmal program in Karnataka, that had a number of success stories where families, localities, villages got together. They called them perhaps the village water sanitation group got together, and they found solutions for their water supply problems at the rural level. Similarly, in Jharkhand, there were small examples. of success which were actually recognized and awarded by government. But what happens is that these are not replicated. Small models, successful models, for some reason there is a mental block that we don't replicate them, even though it will make a huge difference to the lives of the people who own them. Perhaps again it's a issue of political or other interests coming in the way. The second is something that I think we all need to be scared of in terms of urban water supply, is that if the projections are correct and the way Delhi is growing, they will perhaps be correct, 50% of India's population is going to be urban in the next couple of decades. Now that is something that badly needs to be factored in, no matter what our compulsions are, because then we will be creating huge problems. These are just the two things that I want to flag. Thank you.
There's one question from this young lady.
Good evening. I'm Konkanika. I work with the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. My question is essentially around equitable access to water, basically looking at service delivery for slums. Most of these places are unrecognized and therefore it affects the supply connections, the availability of that. So I don't think we can look at water institutions in isolation. It's time for a cohesive and concerted effort towards improved service delivery and equitable service delivery. Your comments on that?
Let me start with the last one. You know, in Bangladesh, the water utility, what it's done is it has now gotten the green signal from government to actually provide water into slum areas. There was a pushback saying that if you do that, you will legitimize occupancy. And the law there has made a distinction between service provision versus ownership of the land. And now the electricity is also being provided in those slum areas. So is garbage collection because of that separation that has been done. And what happens is that the bulk water comes to the slum area, and the residents of the slum area actually manage the internal distribution. So it is a collective approach. So different approach, but you have to make a distinction between the whole notion of ownership of land versus service provision. For us in the World Bank, there was a time when we argued that either private sector comes in or we don't fund. And we've come a long way in our own learning process that actually the spectrum of public, private, community management all work, but there's certain principles around that operation which I've mentioned. About valuing water, about separation of powers, managing investment and operations. If you can do that, then a cooperative model in certain circumstances can well work. In fact, if I'm not wrong, there's some Latin American small towns that are run under a cooperative model. There are also many towns where you have the formal utility which contracts out to small community or private operators that run the periphery. So there are different models that can come up. Intermediate steps, so that will be context specific. But even then you have to start thinking, where are you headed? So Dhaka actually achieved what it did by going through intermediate steps. So the first thing it just did was saying, we want the CEO to be contracted from the market and being given market. Nothing else was changed. And a lot of us said, well, what difference will it make? Well, it was an incremental difference, and it did make a difference. In Kolkata, we had once suggested, you see, in Kolkata what happens is that the water utility provides the water, any deficits the government pays, right? And it pays the water provider. So we said, why not exactly the same subsidy, instead of giving it to the water provider, give it to the municipality, and then let the water provider show that it's providing services to get that subsidy. So you turn around as to where the money flows. That's another intermediate step. Simple things as ring fencing the budget is a very powerful step. simple things such as having an audit of your assets and making sure that asset maintenance programs are incorporated in the storyline. One of the most powerful incentive is if you can create an agency is to give workers shares in the agency. There was a time when Indian Railways was actually run with government owning the full railway, with private companies, but the private companies actually gave shares to workers. That was the time when Indian Railways was at its best. Not when it was fully private, which was under the British, nor when it got fully nationalized, but the intermediate stage when government owned the railways, but actually ran it through contracted service providers, so both public and private. Their workers had the shares, and there was an incentive of workers to want to run this. Uganda, by the way, is a national agency, but it's a public agency, arm's length, and it creates different distribution centers and creates a competition amongst the public agencies. And those that achieve their targets, they actually get a bonus. All of that is possible within a public agency. But the steps you take would depend on the context, and it would depend on what's the final product that you're trying to aim, rather than ad hoc intermediate steps.
Well, let me now request Mr. Rakesh Kakkar, Director, India Habitat Center, who's a vote of thanks.
Well, thank you, Junaid, for a wonderful conversation, for sharing some really powerful insights on what needs to be done with water supply, especially focusing on the delivery aspect of it. I also very much like your ideas as to the diversity of India and how we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution for the entire country. If you take the case of power itself, we have in Delhi a solution which was driven by the private sector, whereas in Gujarat, the case that my friend here mentioned, it was driven entirely by the public sector. There was no privatization. Both have worked. And the only thing surprising is, why is it not spreading to other states? So that is a mystery that I hope we will unravel in some future conversations here. So thank you to the audience for coming here, not only today but repeatedly over the last 3 years, and giving us encouragement to move this forward. Thank you, Dr. Ahluwalia and your colleagues in ICRIER who have worked tirelessly to make this lecture today, or this conversation today and this entire series so interesting and so useful. And with these words, we'll close this session today.
And let's give a big hand.